So for today's review, we will be looking at the Cyborg from the Flashpoint build wave. He is the build figure itself from that wave. This was a year-long build wave that was exclusive to Target that released at the beginning of last year to the end of last year. So around, I believe, October, November was when the final piece came out. I don't remember. It's been a little bit since then. So this build figure, as you can see, well, on camera, I don't know if you can tell how tall it is, but it's a very tall figure. So I thought that by lowering the table level to the lowest that it can go down to, I can fit him in frame. Well, with it zoomed in, you can see his face better, but if I move it closer to the camera to show a better view, it just goes out of frame. So I think when I show the details later of like his body and everything, as you can see right now in a more close-up look, I might have to pop the head off of the body just to show that head sculpt, because it's a really nice head sculpt, and this head sculpt's paint job on the silver areas is what I wish the entire figure looked like as well, which we will get to that when we get to the aesthetics. So now I'm going to zoom out of this because this is, yeah, you can see I dropped it a little bit, right? And he still doesn't fit in frame because he's a very tall figure. So I have to zoom out a little bit, and okay, there we go. Now, because he's a build figure, he doesn't have a bio cart. So if you don't know who Cyborg is or what his role in Flashpoint is, it's a very simplistic role. It's not anything too complicated. So in the events of Flashpoint, if you've never seen the animated movie or read the Flashpoint comic, just to give a rundown, Flashpoint is basically an event that Flash created. So when Flash discovered he can run back in time for the first time, he realized that he could save his mom. But in doing so, by saving his mother, not only did his speedster powers get messed up, he also lost them, because his mom is basically the lynch point, as I would say. His mom's death is the reason why he eventually became Flash. If his mom didn't die, he would never become Flash, right? It's like the idea of like time travel, where if you change one thing, it changes everything. So Flashpoint is the result of saving his mom, and instead of like having the Justice League as usual being the heroes that exist in the future timeline when he's an adult, everything is screwed up. You have Wonder Woman and Aquaman going to war with each other that results into a conflict with the surface world. You also have Superman not actually being Superman. He is a alien who was raised inside a prison, basically to a government prison, to house him and keep an eye on him and basically study him. So he's basically an experiment. That's why they call him Project Superman. So he never becomes the hero of Earth. Then you have Batman, who's basically Thomas Wayne, who becomes Batman after the death of Bruce Wayne, which is his son. And this is a Batman that kills because he has two guns on him, right? So he kills anyone that's a problem, that's like a criminal, basically, I guess, in Gotham. So he just shoots him to death, and his wife becomes Joker. Yeah, so that basically sums up Flashpoint as a whole. It's like everything gone wrong to like a crazy level, and Cyborg himself is really not that different from, I guess, the Cyborg of the normal timeline. It's just that he's taller, bigger, and he just works for the government, I guess, like the military. Hence the logo on his chest, as you can see, that American flag, I guess, kind of what they're referencing. So yeah, he just works for the government, and he plays a role in helping Batman and Flash and all, the crew. They find Superman, and then basically the ending of Flashpoint is one chaotic battle that's happening, and then the world is ending because this timeline is unstable. It should have not existed to begin with. So basically everything is getting erased, and Flash has to go back in time again and allow the death of his mother to happen, in the result that none of this ever existed, and restore the timeline back to what it was. And that is Flashpoint in a nutshell for people who have never read or seen Flashpoint. So I think I spoiled the whole story, but by this point it's a very old story. So and that's it. That's basically what it is. So Cyborg is just a supporting character that is part of that story, and there's really nothing else to explain about him minus the little details we have of him. So yeah, and with that, we shall take a look at this figure now, because he's a very big figure. He's tall and he's hefty. He does have a little bit of weight to him. And I will say this, when I was hunting for this wave, I think out of all the build waves I've hunted for, when it comes to like a like a Target exclusive sort of deal, this one was probably the worst when it came to the third piece, because that was when the Flash figure came out, and the Flash figure was very similar to what his classic costume looked like. So everybody who missed out on that Rebirth Flash figure that came out, I believe, at the end of year one, right? That awesome Flash figure that I still think is the best Flash figure they've ever made in this line. Of course, this one is also another good one. So for everybody who missed out on that Flash figure, they wanted this one. So the demand for this figure was sold out like crazy. And I remember during that month that he was supposed to release, right? That he came out. I was also looking for him. I was looking for the Doomsday versus Superman 2-pack. It was a nightmare to look for this Flash, because every store I went to, I asked them if they had it in stock. They were like, we don't have it in stock. We sold out. It just never came back up in stock. Even on Target's website, it was out of stock for a good period. And until finally, it came back up in stock on Target's website. And I decided, screw the toy hunts. This has been a stressful period just looking for this, this third piece that I needed for this figure. And I ordered it online with 2 notebooks that I was going to use for school. So I was like, might as well just pack everything together in one order. And the rest is history. And here we are. We found all the pieces, because the final piece wasn't that hard to find. Thank goodness. The Wonder Woman figure was easier to track down. But this was a build figure that I had to get in my collection. For one, I don't have a Cyborg figure. I didn't even get the Cyborg figure from the Snyderverse wave of figures, because at the time I just wasn't really into how they did the live action stuff. It just didn't really... I mean, if you look at that Superman figure, like, that doesn't really look like Henry Cavill. But in recent interviews, they explained that sometimes certain things happen behind the scenes with production, and it causes certain issues to happen. So I think they did show like images of the render model of the figure, and it was supposed to look... It had a very similar likeness to Henry. But, things happen. So, but with that said, this figure is quite an impressive figure for a build figure. I think this is another example why I love the build figures that they put out whenever they're big size like this. But this is probably the last time we've seen a build figure being this big, which I will leave that conversation for the next build waves I'll talk about in the future when I get to them. So with that said, let's take a look at the aesthetics of this figure. And he is basically one color throughout the entirety of his body, and he can definitely benefit from metallic paint markers, in my opinion. Like, he needs it. I don't know if the camera will show what I'm talking... Yeah, it will. You can see how, like, I won't say it's like dull plastic gray. I mean, it does look like it, right? I mean, come on. That doesn't look like it's metallic. It just looks very cheaply looking. And this is kind of the one bummer with this figure, was the fact that this was the first like comic Cyborg this line has ever gotten, and we're finally getting another comic Cyborg as of like recent with that announcement of a few weeks ago. trying to figure out my words. A few weeks ago, of the Rebirth Cyborg, who's like in a better scale where he's not too big like this. So he's coming out like sometime in November, I believe. So yeah, this was the first comic Cyborg, and to have the paint be like this on a figure this big is both not a good thing. I feel they could have really spiced up the paint on this guy and made him one of the coolest. He's still a cool figure, but it's just that when you have paint like this kind of gray, I feel it could have benefited from more paint on it. So, because his entire backside is also like this too. And yeah, you can tell that this figure needs another coat of paint over everything on it. And I think this figure would have benefited a lot from that. So that's my opinion on the paint job when it comes to that. Now, as for his gun, it's very nicely sculpted, right? Like in the areas like that are painted gunmetal gray, but like all this kind of doughy gray. You know what? I'll call it doughy gray because it looks really flat. It doesn't look like there's much going on with it. Like, it doesn't look like metallics or anything. It just seems very cheap looking. Yeah, all this can use a wash. Like, if you have metallic markers like I do, I don't know if the ones I have are the right ones for this guy. Honestly, I will probably try it, but if it doesn't look good, I might have to get a different set of colors to kind of add some wear and tear onto this to make it pop. But as I was saying earlier with his head, which I'm going to pop off just to show the silver paint on his head, if the entirety of the figure had remotely like somewhat of the paint that they had on his head like this, in a more, not like darker silver, but like a mix between light and dark, this would have been amazing if this color was throughout the entirety of the body. It would have been at least a little bit better. But you can see that the silver or the metal is not the same color. Like, this is more darker, this is more lighter and cheaper looking. So that is kind of the one flaw that exists on this build figure. And even when you have the head on, you can see the difference between the grays. So yeah, not a good thing. And yeah, unfortunately, that is something that that hinders this figure from being completely amazing, is the paint. It could have benefited from a lot of paint. But in terms of sculpt, though, I will say that the sculpt on this figure is not bad. His leg is very nicely sculpted, right? His arm can is nicely sculpted. Even this arm that isn't for anything is also nicely sculpted. You see that there's a lot of, let me zoom in on that. There's like a lot of details on here that, again, they get overshadowed by the gray plastic. And if you use some sort of other colors to it to paint it or to make it look a little bit different, to break up that contrast, the contrast on it, I think a lot of these sculpted areas will be way better than what it is showing right now. And if you look at his legs, right, there are a lot of damage on his armor to show that he's been, you know, doing his job a lot, right? So I'm trying to show it the best I can, right? Like the back over here, right? All this. So yeah, I don't know if the camera is picking it up better, but in hand, this thing is very cheap looking when it comes to just the color. In terms of the plastic quality, it still feels good. It feels durable, but in terms of the paint, that's where it's, you know, not the greatest. So for articulation, so I gotta zoom out. His arms are quite stiff on mine. So this is one thing that I noticed that I didn't notice until like later when I had this figure. This back part right here, you can pop these open. And I think they made this soft for a reason, is because when you were putting the arms in, they did this so you can put the arms inside them easily, right? But sometimes his arms tend to freeze up on me where they don't want to move. So what I do is I take these off and then use a little bit of force just to make them move, like to articulate, so I can do that. Same thing like this arm. You see how tight that is? So that's a good thing that they added. Now, it does hinder his arms from really going up too high, because not only does this have weight, this shoulder armor, which is basically what that is, also gets in the way. So the arms are not going to go lifting up. You're not going to get them all the way back, right? 360, right? All around, because this hinders that movement. As for, let me try to get him to stand. So as for his arm over here, there's no rotation or swivel in this joint. This is a single jointed arm that will not swivel. He does have swivel up here, and that's it. So gun arm, very limited when it comes to articulation. His other arm does have double joint. It does work. And it also has a swivel. So, and mine has a QC problem right here where it doesn't go all the way in. Let me see if I can, there we go. Yeah, so there's that. His torso is very loose because of how much that arm cannon weighs. So you can see how it has good movement. I do like the movement on it, but it does get annoying because one arm is heavier than the other arm. So there's that problem with that. His waist, very tight, but it does move and it will hold really good. So there's that, and it does do what you need it to. His legs, on the other hand, I will show, they do not kick out too much, as you can see, because this diaper piece, as we like to call it, hinders his leg from kicking out higher than it can. And the fact that this leg is also a single jointed leg, but it has rotation and swivel, so that's good. Like any single jointed figure this big, they do give it that articulation, which I'm surprised doesn't exist on this figure when it comes to his hand, because, or to his gun arm, because I want to bring in another figure as an example. Give me a minute. For a second. Here we go. It was not close to me. Let's bring in another build figure. So you have the Joker, but I'm just going to move him off the table. Oh god, this table is not big enough for the both of them. You have the Joker bot, who I've done a review on, but you see how it's like a single joint with the gun arm, but he also has a let me try. There's a swivel right there with that arm. So I'm surprised that they did not give him, the Cyborg, they did not give him that sort of articulation point, which I think he could have benefited from way better than just this, right? And then this arm does swivel, it does move, it has a hinge joint on it, but because the armor gauntlet thing gets in the way, there's no point of that joint really, except for moving it inward. Yeah, so there's that. And then his feet, they do articulate. You can see the toe joint right there. It's very stiff, but there is a little bit of movement. So, yeah. And that is the articulation on this guy when it comes to his body. When it comes to his head, he can barely look up, hindered by his neck. He can look down better. He can look side to side. He can hinge his, rock his head side to side a little bit. But again, his neck articulation is also very hindered by the way that the neck is sculpted. So there are good and there are bad areas in articulation for this figure, but it does not destroy the overall presence of this figure. He does have a very strong presence on the shelf if you have him next to your other build figures or just big size action figures, and he's still a pretty cool Cyborg figure regardless of the flaws. I think the flaws will always exist with Mcfarlane. There's never like a figure that can be a perfect figure, of course. There's no such thing as a perfect action figure. But as a Cyborg figure, in more of the more, I guess, recent action figure releases, is a pretty good Cyborg. If you need someone this big. if you can wait. Oh, actually, I can't say that because this figure is already kind of, I think it's retired now. You can't even get this figure unless you buy it on the third-party means to get the pieces, which is going to cost more. But if you missed out on the Cyborg, it's not the end of the world. There is that Cyborg that's coming out soon from the Rebirth comic, and I think that Cyborg will be a better scale with the Teen Titan characters than this one. Even though I still like the idea of a big Cyborg, because that is what I grew up with in that TV show. Cyborg was bigger than the rest of the team. This guy gives me those vibes, but he's way too big. So, yeah, and there you have it. That is the Cyborg build figure from the Flashpoint build wave. And if you liked this video, give it a like. If you like the way I do my content, you can also subscribe to this channel if you want to. But with that said, take care, and I'll see you in the next video.